Good morning, everyone. This is Kenny LaPointe with Oregon Housing and Community Services. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Affairs here, and we also have Megan Bolton, our Senior Research Analyst, who will be helping out with this presentation on the statewide housing plan. Again, thank you for joining. This is a Phase 1 outreach webinar for many of you who have not been able to participate in the local community meetings that we've held across the state. First off, some logistical information. Your lines are all muted. We ask that you please use the chat box on your page if you have any questions, and we will try to respond directly to your questions in the chat box. If there is a bigger question that we feel is relevant to the large group, we will try to address that throughout the PowerPoint. We also want to point you to our statewide housing plan webpage on the OHCS website, which we'll also reference later on in the presentation. We have a fillable discussion guide that is available on that webpage, and you can go on there and provide direct feedback into the statewide housing plan through that website and that fillable form. That is going to be the best way for you to do that throughout this presentation because of the format and structure for this, unless you're planning to attend an in-person outreach session later on. So just a little bit of an introduction into the statewide housing plan. So Oregon Housing and Community Services is embarking on this big statewide housing plan for Oregon. We began earlier this year around April on putting this together. We're working with consultants, Enviro Issues and Eco Northwest to help us develop the plan. We have been conducting statewide outreach over the last couple of months, and we'll be actually wrapping that up at the beginning of December. We've been all over the state of Oregon, from anywhere from Burns to Ontario to Baker City to LeGrand to Bend to the coast. We've been in Portland, Southern Oregon. We still have a few stops left in Coos Bay and Medford, Eugene, Washington County, Clackamas counties as well. So if you're able to participate in any of those local community meetings, we encourage you to do so. And the details on when and where those meetings will be held is available on the statewide housing plan webpage. So the plan is we're basically conducting this outreach. We're getting feedback from communities across the state on what folks are experiencing as far as homelessness, poverty, housing related issues. So far, we're hearing some pretty recurring themes around land use, around flexibility of resources, around supportive housing, and a variety of other issues. So it's been a good opportunity for communities to really get into the details on what they're experiencing and what's preventing them from doing more housing development and from really mitigating the impacts of poverty in their communities. So we're conducting the outreach, we're taking the feedback that we're receiving, and we're bringing that back to our consultants who are utilizing that feedback. They're combining it with what we're calling an environmental scan of our agency's resources, which includes a big look at all the resources that OHCS has, which we have a significant number of programs. So they're taking a look at all those programs and what the program resources could potentially be used for and what they're used for now. They're combining that with the outreach information, the feedback information, as well as a look at other state agency resources at the Salem level to see if there's any potential flexibility in those resources and alignment opportunities. So we're really looking at other systems and other state agencies to see if we can align our resources with theirs to create more efficiency across our state agency systems. So that is kind of a bigger framework for what the plan hopes to accomplish. I'll give a little bit of an overview at the end of the presentation on where we're going to go next after the Phase 1 outreach. So I'm going to turn it over to Megan Bolton, our Senior Research Analyst at this point in time.
Great, thanks, Kenny. So hi, everyone. This is Megan, and I'm just going to take you through some of the, so there's another piece of this is the kind of data and market analysis needs assessment. We're working with Eco Northwest on this part of it. They're also involved in the environmental scan. But we've been collecting various data points for some time now, and Eco Northwest is helping us do a little bit of a deeper dive into the housing needs assessment. And so I'll just kind of go through some of the data that we have, and I want to let people know we have kind of data profiles on that statewide housing plan website that Kenny mentioned. We have a statewide profile, and we also have profiles we've created for each county. I think we only have about 4 left. We're almost done with all 36 counties. So I encourage people to take a look at those and let us know if there are things missing from those, if something seems off. We're trying to collect as much data right now as we can. So with that said, I just want to kind of jump into some of what we have collected and some of what we know. So this first slide really just gets at how we define affordability. So when we talk about affordable housing, we mean housing that is 30% or less of a household's income is spent on housing costs. So when we talk about this, we often are talking about people of different income levels. In the housing world, we often split it into the buckets that you see here. And so for somebody earning 0 to 30% of area median income, that might be somebody on Social Security or a full-time minimum wage earner. They can afford housing costs of a maximum of $500 per month. For somebody like a preschool teacher or 2 full-time minimum wage workers earning up to about $38,000 a year, they can afford to have maximum housing costs of $1,000 a month. And then for people in the 60 to 80% of area median income bucket, perhaps an auto mechanic or a carpenter, their maximum housing costs are $1,300 per month. And I think what you can see at the top there is that right now, and this is probably already outdated as rents continue to increase, the median rent for an apartment in Oregon is $1,619. And certainly that's something that varies pretty dramatically from place to place, as do wages. So that's something, we'll be sure to be kind of looking at that more locally as well. But kind of broadly speaking, we know that it's really tough for somebody even at 80% of area median income to afford market rents right now. So kind of stepping back and kind of taking a look at how we got here to kind of this place where we have expensive housing markets and people struggling to afford rent. We know that homeownership rates have been on the decline since the foreclosure crisis began. And so really had a pretty significant dip in Oregon from about 2012 to 2015 and have just started to come back up. Just the most recent data shows kind of this first increase in the homeownership rate in quite some time. But that steady decrease over the years has driven more and more people into the rental market. And had an effect on inventory, which we'll get to as well. Homeownership rates, it's important to note, really vary pretty significantly by race and ethnicity. So as you can see, it declined among most racial and ethnic groups, but people of color experienced disproportionately low homeownership rates compared to white households, with the homeownership rates ranging from 30% among African Americans to 63% among white households. So we know that changes made to underwriting standards as a result of the housing crisis have disproportionately affected low-income households with higher debt-to-income ratios and lower credit scores, characteristics which are more likely to affect young people and people of color. So as the rental market tightens and rents increase as a result of these declining homeownership rates, communities of color often face displacement, increased rent burden, and an increased risk of eviction or homelessness. So on top of kind of the decreasing homeownership rates and rising number of people in the rental market, we've had this pretty significant decline in new building permits, where you can see this really steep drop from about 2005 to 2010 when it hit a low. And I want to note too, at the same time that this has been happening, I don't have a slide on it, but we know that population growth is happening really rapidly, right? So Oregon went from the 20th fastest growing state from 2010 to 2011 to the 6th fastest growing state from 2015 to 2016. So we've got more and more people coming into the state. and at the same time that we had kind of this significant decline in building permits, in residential permits. So that's just led to it. I mean, we can see that it's starting to go back up right now, but that it's not. It hasn't been rising at a rate that would line up with the population growth and with demand. And I will also kind of point out that we do see that that green line is the 5 or more units, so kind of more the multifamily units. That orange line is the single family units. So there used to be a big gap there back in like 2005. That gap was biggest, and that's starting to close. So we know that we're getting more, again, rental, kind of most likely those are a lot of more rentals. But it is important to note that a lot of that growth is in metro areas, specifically in the Portland metro area. So this is the kind of thing that's important, that we're also looking at county by county to see what the stock is looking at like and what the permits are looking like. So this means vacancy rates are really low, and we know that. Everybody, I think, knows that. Low vacancy rates indicate a tight housing market. The homeownership vacancy rate in Oregon has trended pretty closely with the national rate. But in 2014, Oregon's rental vacancy rate was the 2nd lowest in the country. In 2016, it was the 7th lowest. It's been below 5% since 2011, and 5% is sort of often considered the standard for a balanced housing market. And we know, again, this is something we certainly know both anecdotally and from some data, that the rental vacancy rates are much lower than 4.4% in many parts of the state. They're below 2%, below 1% even in some parts of the state. And so this means that prices are going up, and really prices both for home ownership and for rentals are on the rise. So the median home sales price, this is data from our MLS administrators, kind of at the regional level. We see this kind of U shape where home sale prices, median home sale prices were kind of a low around 2011, but have really come back up, and in almost all cases are above their 2007 median sales prices. So we know that, but part of the rising costs now, I think, are due to some of that low inventory and that low kind of growth even in the single family market for so many years. And now as demand is picking up and incomes are picking up, there's this increased competition for homes. And certainly rents are on the rise. So this shows that Oregon had, from January 2013 to January 2017, Oregon had sort of the biggest percent change in rent in the country. Looking at states, at a 30% increase in rent from 1242 to 1619. And the next slide just shows this kind of graphically comparing Oregon to the US. So you can see that Oregon used to have median rent below the US, kind of hit the national average in about November of 2013, and now is actually quite a bit above sort of the US median rent. So we have rising rents and rising home prices, and people are struggling to find affordable places to live. And this just shows this a little bit in more detail. This graph shows the number on the left-hand side is the number of units by affordability category, and on the right are the households by income categories. So what this basically shows, if you look at the dark red bucket at the bottom, there are 123,000 households with extremely low income, so that's 0 to 30% of median family income. So it's kind of around $20,000 or below. And there's only about 60,000 units that are affordable to them. So meaning they wouldn't have to pay more than 30% of their income on housing costs. And then it goes up the income brackets there. And so you can see that there's certainly the biggest shortage of units is for sort of those extremely low income and very low income renters. So people kind of at or below 50% of median family income. And then you get kind of most of the units in that 50 to 80% bucket. So and what I think is important to note on this slide is that, so this is kind of, if the, you know, this doesn't take into account that some of the people in the yellow bucket, that those low income folks, might be living in the orange or red units. And what we know is that many of the people in kind of the red or orange buckets are living in those in the units that are not really affordable to them. So we just have to kind of, those are the important things to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is this is, it may be that some of those units that are affordable to people under 50% of MFI, some of those units might be poor quality. Some of those units may be far away from services, jobs, good schools, et cetera. Or they may be, because this is statewide data, they may be in Eastern Oregon, and somebody living in Portland is probably not going to move there. So this is another one where we're really working with Eco Northwest on a methodology to get this down to the county level so that we can really take a look at what this looks like county by county. But when you take availability into consideration, the situation really gets even worse. So we know that when you look at what's affordable and actually available to households in those categories, there are only 23 units that are both affordable and available for every 100 extremely low income renter household. So big shortage of units, and this is something obviously as an agency I think we'll be talking about how we focus on that. And so what that means, I think as we all know, is that people spend a lot more of their income on their housing costs. So, and this is especially true for the lowest income renters. So as you can see on this graph, people in the kind of the 0 to 30% of median family income bucket, 81% of them have severe cost burden. So that means they're actually spending more than half of their income on housing costs. And in fact, in most cases, the kind of average cost burden for extremely low income households is right around 70%. So people are spending a huge amount of their income on housing costs. And this is a real issue. It's a real kind of indicator or risk of homelessness if people, especially people with low incomes, don't have enough money at the end of the month for other basic necessities. They can be a real risk of falling into homelessness. And I think it is important to note that these numbers have really increased recently. So the percentage of homeowners with cost burden remained stable from 2000 to 2015 at about 25%, but a much larger proportion of renters were paying more than 30% of their income on housing in 2015 than in 2000. So it's up to 49% in 2015 compared to 40% in 2000. So almost a 10% increase in that number of people with cost burden, of number of renters overall with cost burden. So this is a real issue and is getting worse. And just another quick graph or map, sorry, this is a map showing rent burden. So this is percent of renters with severe rent burden. So those are people, again, spending more than half their income on housing costs. So the darker green counties are where a greater proportion of people are facing this issue. The thing that I kind of want to note here is that even in places where the affordability doesn't look so bad, this is where the quality of housing units may be quite more of an issue. And we don't have great data on housing quality, but this is the kind of thing we're getting a little bit in our outreach and hope to hear more about from folks on kind of housing quality issues, because this is really important as well. We don't want people to just be able to afford units, we want people to be able to afford high quality, safe units. And kind of speaking of quality issues, we also like to talk a little bit about manufactured homes, because 40% of manufactured housing in Oregon is affordable to people at 50% of median family income, compared to 21% of other housing types. So it's a kind of a critical stock of affordable housing. But 48% of these homes were built before 1980, which is when HUD began regulating construction on them. So they're more likely to be pre-HUD code and this is a higher number than nationwide. So we have a pretty, it's a critical supply of affordable housing, but we know that a large percentage of it may be kind of in poor condition. And so that's something that we as an agency are also looking to focus on. So switching gears a little bit to the economic side of things, you know, we also have a number of anti-poverty programs here at OHCS, and so also want to look at this side of the equation. So we know that poverty in Oregon was sort of at a high in 2011, 2012, and it was pretty high even up to just last year. It has just started to go down a bit from 2015 to 2016. You see a decrease in both the number of people in poverty and the poverty rate. But it's important to note that there's still more than 530,000 people living below the poverty line. In 2016, the poverty threshold for a family of four was 24,300, and so the poverty rate, is now at 13.3%, and this does correspond with an increase in median household income, which went from 54,700 to 57,500 in 2016. But what I think is important to note is that median gross rents increased by 6.5% in the past year, while that median household income only increased by 5.1%. And in previous years, there was more stagnant income growth, while there was still those big growths in median rent. So even though we're seeing some progress now on the income side of things, kind of the many years of stagnant income compared to rising rents means that people are still really struggling. And this slide just actually shows that. So this just shows those kind of income stagnation, or actually a decrease of 1.6% in family income compared to kind of that 9.8% increase in rent. And then certainly there's been increases in other costs as well. This is another one where it's important to look at the differences. Well, it's important to look at most of these data points by race and ethnicity, and we will be looking at as many data points as we can by racial and ethnic groups, as well as looking at groups like families with children, people with disabilities, and veterans, and a number of other special populations that we'll be taking a deeper look at many of these data points for. But certainly there's a large disparity in poverty rates by race and ethnicity. More than 1 in 4 African Americans in Oregon is living below the poverty line, compared to just 1 out of 8 white folks. So important to keep that in mind. But we also kind of want to point out that the poverty rate is kind of a flawed measure. It was developed in the 60s. You know, it hasn't changed since then, doesn't take into consideration things like geographic differences and other costs. So, so this is another way to sort of look at income a little bit. And so this is called the Self-Sufficiency standard. And it shows, and this is only a sampling of the types of households that they do this for, but they look at various household types and calculate sort of the basic income that somebody of that household type would need to make to kind of really make ends meet. And so you can see, again, this is a sampling of counties and household types, but you can see that, for instance, in Lane County, 2 adults and 2 kids would need $60,000 really to kind of meet those basic needs, which is quite a bit above the $24,000 threshold, poverty threshold for a family of 4. So it's we're going to be looking at kind of these thresholds as well, and thinking about how many people kind of fall below these thresholds, not just the poverty threshold. And finally, we are taking a look at data on homelessness, and we recently got data from each continuum of care, all 7 continuums of care across the state on their point in time from this January. And so this shows that point in time from this year showed 13,953 homeless people in the state. And this just counts really people either living in shelters or in places not meant for habitation. This does not include people who may be doubled up and living sort of more precariously in more precariously housed situations. And in many ways, maybe, I think is an undercount of the homeless population, but it gives us at least kind of an idea of who's homeless across the state. And we can see kind of that about 3,500 people were in households with children. About 9,800 are in households without children, and about 605 were unaccompanied youth under the age of 18. You can see that sort of the households without children and unaccompanied youth are a little more likely to be unsheltered than people in households with children. We also know from the data that there are 3,387 chronically homeless people that were identified, and 74% of this population was unsheltered. So they're much more likely to be living in places not meant for habitation and are in need of supportive housing. We also just yesterday, the Oregon Department of Education released the homeless student numbers, which showed, I forget the number, about 22,500 homeless students. And that data, they are actually using a different definition where they are counting kids who are doubled up or sort of couch surfing. And so it's a little bit of a different definition than the point in time, but really important we'll be using that data as well and thinking about that. That's the highest number that it's ever been as they've been counting this. So a real concern. So that's just a kind of a preview of the data that we've been collecting.
So this is Kenny LaPointe again, Assistant Director of Public Affairs at OHCS. So kind of wanted to give you some details on where we're going next from here. So these are the principles that are going to be following the plan. So equity, collaboration, compassion, effectiveness, and certainly innovation are all principles that we will make sure are incorporated into the plan, principles and values that are incorporated into the plan as we develop it with our consultants and with the communities across the state. So these are kind of those things that are leading us with the planning process. I wanted to provide details on where you can get input back into the plan, being that this webinar is not the best format to do the feedback. We have a discussion guide, as I mentioned before, that is available on the OHCS Statewide Housing Plan webpage. The link to that fillable form is here on this page. This webinar, as I responded to a question earlier, this webinar will be made available on the OHCS Statewide Housing Plan webpage, including the slides and the audio, so you can forward that along to partners, other folks in your offices who may want to provide feedback or listen to this presentation. So feel free to send that along. We will try and get that posted and on the webpage as soon as possible following this webinar. So the plan development process, as I mentioned before, we're in phase 1 of outreach. We still have some remaining communities to get out into. As I mentioned, we have a few left over the next coming weeks. We will be completing the outreach around December 6th, I believe, is our final outreach session. Again, we will be taking the feedback we've received back to our consultants. We will be pairing that with the environmental scan of our agency resources and how those resources could be used. And I mentioned earlier, one of the principles or values of the plan that's helping to lead us is innovation. So we're really taking a look at our existing resources and trying to identify ways that we can be more innovative with them and potentially more efficient and effective. So we want to create a system that works really, really well for our partners and is not onerous and creates a bunch of barriers to doing work in communities across the state. So we'll be, as we complete phase 1 and wrap it up and get the feedback in with our consultants and have them assess the environmental scan as well as the other state agency resources, we will be coming back out to communities. Actually, our consultants will be coming back out with a phase 2 outreach plan. They'll definitely be more regional in nature, but we will be coming out with some potential alternatives and recommendations for how we can use our funding in the future to better serve Oregon and our partners. Following that phase 2 outreach session, which will likely occur around March of this year, we will be coming, or next year, sorry, 2018, we will be coming back out to communities with the phase 3 outreach, which I assure you is the last phase of outreach. We'll be coming back out to communities with the phase 3, which is really a presentation of the draft statewide housing plan. And that will likely occur around the beginning of the summer of 2018. And that will be really formatted for you all to provide feedback to us and let us know if we, got this statewide housing plan right, or if we need to make sure we add some additional considerations into the plan. So that is the process. And then following that draft plan presentation, we will have a final plan, which we are very excited to get to. One thing I want to mention is while OHCS is in a planning process right now, we recognize that the state of Oregon is in a housing crisis right now. And we are not sitting back and telling folks that we are in a planning year. We are doing planning, but we are also working on a series of strategic goals during 2017 and 2018 to really address the rental housing gap in Oregon, really try and bridge the minority home ownership gap, really taking some moves to prevent and reduce poverty in Oregon, and also doing some significant work around foreclosure mitigation across the state, as foreclosure continues to impact many rural communities in Oregon, even still today. So again, these are the next steps, as I mentioned, completing the outreach, environmental scanning, gap analysis kind of being looked at by our consultants, coming back out in 2018 with those alternatives, and then a draft plan around the summer of 2018. So I wanted to provide you all with our contact information. I think I'm going to be giving you some of your time back. I know this was scheduled for longer, but we were able to get through it quickly. So happy to give you your lunch hour back. Here's some contact information for myself, for Megan Bolton, Shoshana Oppenheim, who is our planning and policy manager and is actually leading the statewide housing plan work. These are good contacts for you if you have questions about the plan, questions about our engagement strategy. Another thing I think I failed to mention, or we failed to mention during the process, is that we are actually going to be doing focus groups in this phase 1 of outreach, where we're going to be asking some questions of folks who actually receive services from our partners who are utilizing OHCS resources, and also feedback from folks who have not been able to access OHCS resources for one reason or another. So we really want that client perspective to weigh in on the plan. That is a critical piece of the development of the statewide housing plan. You have a link here to the statewide housing plan webpage, and again, the discussion guide and fillable feedback form. So please utilize the webpage and the fillable form to get your feedback into the agency. And we thank you very much for participating, and we encourage you to attend any of the in-person outreach sessions that we have remaining that are going to be in your communities. So thank you again, and have a wonderful day, and have a great Thanksgiving.